It's primary election day for 14 states across the country, including Alabama. We have lots coming for you tonight. I'm Sam Humphrey, and this is Eagle Eye on the primaries.
Of the last 50 polls that have been done nationally, I beat Trump 47 of those 50 times.
Tonight.
Progressive ideas are popular ideas, even if there are a lot of people on this stage who don't want to say so.
Americans across 14 states head to the polls to cast votes for their favorite candidates.
If we spend the next 4 months tearing our party apart, we're going to watch Donald Trump spend the next 4 years tearing our country apart.
Imagine spending the better part of 2020 with Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump. Think about what that will be like for this country.
I'm running for president to be the Democratic nominee that rebuilds our Democratic Party, takes it out of their hands, and truly puts it in the hands of the people of this country.
My entire career has been wrapped up in dealing with civil rights and civil liberties. I don't expect anything. I plan to earn the vote.
We are looking at a party that has decided that we're either going to support someone who's a democratic socialist or somebody who has a long history of being a Republican.
I know that if I were black, my success would have been a lot harder to achieve. That's just a fact, and we've got to do something about it than rather just demagogue about it.
Democratic candidates looking for the opportunity to face off against Donald Trump in November. And in Alabama, the race for Senate continues as Republican candidates seek votes to face Democratic Senator Doug Jones for one of 2 Alabama Senate seats. This is Eagle Eye's Eye on the Primaries. Now to Sam Humphrey at the news desk.
Tonight, over a third of the total delegates are at stake in the Democratic presidential primary, the biggest prize in California with over 400 total delegates. We'll also see Texas and North Carolina award over 100 delegates. And of course, we'll have all the details on Alabama's 52 delegates as well as the down-ballot Republican Senate race in Amendment 1. After tonight, the path for every candidate will become more clear, as frontrunners look to distance themselves and others look to gain momentum. Now let's look at the candidates running to be the Democratic Party's candidate for president. Still in the race are former Vice President Joe Biden, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, and Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. With a statewide election, there are many logistical concerns and factors the state must account for. For more on this, Eagle Eye's AJ Rivera speaks with Alabama's Secretary of State John Merrill on the phone to find out what voters need to know for Super Tuesday. AJ?
So, for our viewers who are unaware, Mr. Secretary, could you please tell us what your role is in the primary election?
Well, as the Chief Elections Officer for the state of Alabama, it's our role to ensure that the elections are safe, secure, and that the results are accountable and transparent for all people that are involved. We want to ensure that we've made it easy to vote and hard to cheat.
I know there's been a lot of talk, especially in 2016, about Russian interference in our elections. What steps has Alabama taken to ensure that that doesn't happen here?
Well, the main thing that you need to know is that the Russian interference that has been referred to in the reports that have been introduced before has to do with social media, has to do with electronic introduction of influence. It does not have to do with the tabulation change or in allowing a vote to be changed for whom it was cast. That is not the case. It will never be the case, certainly not in Alabama. We have mechanisms and safeguards in place to prevent that from occurring.
What do Alabama voters need to know prior to this election?
Well, the main thing they need to know is that they have to be a registered voter. And if you have a question about whether or not you're a registered voter, it's too late to register for the March 3rd primary, but not for the March 31st runoff. And so what I would encourage folks to do is to visit our website at alabamavotes.gov or at Vote for Alabama on our mobile app to see what their status is. If they are registered to vote, but they're inactive, they can update their voter registration record and be active on election day, or they can do it in person at the polls. all you need to access the electronic registration record is a valid Alabama driver's license. Then we want each and every voter that goes to the polls to be an informed voter. So you need to download your sample ballot from our website at alabamavotes.gov, and you need to study the ballot, check on the candidates, see which candidate you want to support, see what issues are on the ballot that you're going to be voting on, and make sure that you've got your questions answered before you go to your polling site and one of the 2,499 polling sites in Alabama.
Where is it that voters can find out where their polling site is?
They can do that on the mobile app or at alabamavotes.gov. And if they don't have access to the internet, that information is also available by contacting your local probate office or local board of registrar's office, or in getting the poll list that was printed in the local newspaper in your county last week.
What is your expectation for voter turnout?
We think that we'll have somewhere between 1.1 and 1.3 million Alabamians go to the polls, and we anticipate that will be somewhere between 30 and 35% voter turnout.
Could you specify those expectations for the Republican primary versus the Democratic primary?
No, I think the Democratic turnout will be a little higher than it's been before, and the main reason for that is because there are a lot of presidential candidates that are still active, and a lot of presidential candidates that are trying to secure the votes of the Democratic faithful. So they are continuing to try to get people out to vote, and we expect that a number of folks will come out just to participate in the presidential primary.
I know you had mentioned earlier that the primary is March 3rd, but that there would be a runoff if needed on March 31st. Could you explain a little bit why or when there would be a runoff?
Yes. If a candidate fails to receive 50% of the vote plus one vote, then there will be a necessary runoff, because our law requires and our party rules require that the individuals that are the nominees receive 50% of the vote plus one vote.
Thank you so much for taking this phone call and allowing us to talk with you.
Thank you for reaching out. Let me know if I can help you further.
Before we dive into Super Tuesday, we have to talk about what has led up to today. 4 states have already had their primaries or caucuses, with Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina voters went to the polls over the last few weeks. Let's see how they fared. In the Iowa caucus, we have 40 delegates up for grabs, with Buttigieg winning 26.2 with 13 delegates, Sanders second with 26.1% of the votes and 12 delegates, followed by Warren with 18% and 8 delegates, Biden at 15.8% and 6 delegates, and Klobuchar with 12.3% and 1 delegate. Other candidates received minor percentages and 0 delegates. Now on to New Hampshire, we have Sanders winning with 25.7% of the votes with 9 delegates, Buttigieg second with 24.4% with 9 delegates, Klobuchar with third with 19.8% and 6 delegates, Biden at 8.4% and no delegates, and Warren at 9.2%. She did not receive any delegates. The Nevada caucus was February 26, and 36 delegates were up for grabs. Sanders won 46.8% of the vote with 24 delegates. Biden came in second with 20.2% of the vote and 9 delegates. Buttigieg came in third with 14.3% of delegates. Warren had 9.7% of the vote, not enough to pick up any delegates. Steyer got 4.7% of the vote and no delegates, with Klobuchar getting 4.2% of the vote. Now, South Carolina primary, most recent primary this past weekend at February 29th, 54 delegates were up for grabs. Biden won big here. It was the real first test to see if candidates could gain the support of African-American voters. Biden got 39 of those 38 delegates with 48.4% of the vote. Sanders came in second with 19.9% of the votes and 13 delegates. Steyer came in third in South Carolina with 11.3% of the vote and picked up 2 delegates. He then dropped out of this race Saturday night, and Pete Buttigieg got 8.2% of the vote and received no delegates. He dropped out of the race this past Sunday. Elizabeth Warren is still in the race and got 7.1% of the vote in South Carolina. She did not pick up any delegates. Klobuchar got 3.2% and Gabbard with 1.3%. So Jack, tell us,
for our viewers who are unaware, Mr. Secretary, could you please tell us what your role is in the primary election?
Well, as the chief elections officer for the state of Alabama, it's our role to ensure that the elections are
in New Hampshire and Nevada. And it was really a firewall in South Carolina that Biden really showed that he's not out of it. And I think that's really changed the dynamic of how these primaries, and especially this Super Tuesday, is going to go now that Biden has seemingly found a backstop in these southern states and hopes to pick up a couple more tonight.
Mm-hmm. And what position are the candidates in going into these Super Tuesday elections?
Well, for Bernie Sanders, I think the biggest thing is that Bernie Sanders, for the first time in a long time, possibly ever, is a front runner. He has never had to operate under those circumstances. Bernie Sanders has usually been trailing in the race, especially in 2016. He was in second place the whole time. And for the whole time, he had to operate in that way. And that's going to be a different thing heading in this 2020, and especially today on Super Tuesday. Bernie Sanders was able to punch anyone he wanted and kind of be aggressive on the campaign trail, and now he's going to have to try to hold a lead rather than try to accrue one. For Joe Biden, I think the biggest thing is that he needs to do well in the southern states. That's his backstop, and that's the places he's going to have the advantage demographically and sort of socioeconomically, and especially this is a more church-going population, a more grounded population in that way for the South, and I think Biden really has the demographic advantage there to pick up delegates on Bernie. And if he wants to win big on Super Tuesday, he's going to have to do well in places like Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, and especially Texas and Virginia.
Now, what does this all mean for the candidates in the polls today?
Well, I think that means that we're very rapidly approaching a two-horse race, and we're seeing that very rapidly unfold here as Biden and Bernie Sanders really emerge as the two guys to be in this Democratic primary. I mean, the odds makers over at 538 say we have a 61% chance of heading into the convention with no one with the sufficient amount of delegates, so moving towards a contested convention in that scene. And so we're obviously looking at a situation where the Biden and Bloomberg camp is matched up with the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren camp and are going to have to battle at the convention in the summer to decide who's going to be able to come out on top in this primary race.
Now, former NYC Mayor Michael Bloomberg didn't participate in the first four contests, so today his debut was on the ballot. Are we expecting a strong performance from him today?
I'm not expecting a strong performance from Michael Bloomberg due almost entirely to the fact that Joe Biden was able to bounce back so significantly in South Carolina. I think Mike Bloomberg represented a more moderate, more established Democratic population that wanted to put their support and money behind someone that's going to keep the Democratic principles in a way that Bernie Sanders, a more radical candidate, was not going to do so. And I see Mike Bloomberg as almost a placeholder candidate for those who wanted to vote for Joe Biden but saw Joe Biden as too weak to not have a path to the presidency. And now I think the script has been flipped after South Carolina. Joe Biden showed his ability to be a strong candidate. That was the first primary he's ever won in multiple different presidential races and campaigns that he has had. That's the first time he's ever won. So he's obviously celebrating and shown himself as a strong candidate. So I think directly due to that, Mike Bloomberg will not have a good night here on Super Tuesday.
Now, do you expect any of the candidates to drop out after tonight?
After tonight, because of what we saw with Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg earlier this week, I do not expect any of the candidates to drop out. I think we'll be dealing with these same four candidates up into the convention. As I mentioned previously, I think Joe Biden and Mike Bloomberg will represent a strong pool of similar voting delegates, and I think Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren will represent a equally strong in size number of delegates, but neither will have the 1990 required to get to the candidacy come the convention.
Mm-hmm. Now, 34% of the delegates will be distributed after tonight. What is the next big challenge for candidates looking to get those delegates?
I think the next big challenge is going to be endorsements. It's all about who you know, especially in a year where the opposition party is not going to have as much opposition focused on it. The Republican Party has their nominee already. They're not going to have to deal with the logistics that the Democratic Party is heading to the convention this summer. They're going to have to deal with what Joe Biden is dealing with right now. He was able to accrue the endorsements of both Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, along with Beto O'Rourke, over the past few days, and that has really helped his case. And I think the more we get closer to the convention, the closer we'll see sort of a anti-radical movement that Bernie Sanders is promoting, and an anti-Bernie movement sort of coalesce behind the campaign of Joe Biden.
Well, thank you, Jack. We'll be right back with more. You're watching Eye on the Primary. Eagle Eye is following the Alabama elections particularly closely tonight, and we've got 3 different votes to talk about. First off, let's get to the Democratic candidates and how they have been polling in Alabama. Voters in Alabama were able to vote in either party primaries so long as they declared their preference for that party at the polls today. There are 52 delegates to go around. In order for a primary candidate to be declared the winner in Alabama, they must win the majority of the vote. Now, if no candidate wins that majority, the state will hold a runoff between the top 2 vote getters. That runoff will be on March 31st. Now, the candidates on the ballot for the Democratic nomination are former Vice President Joe Biden, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, and Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. We've got political expert Ryan Lavoie from Tiger Communications here with us in studio to talk about some of the voting trends we've seen in the primaries before in Alabama. In Lee County, Ryan?
Thank you so much. And so when we look at this primary, this Democratic primary, we'll start with the presidential primary. We got to look at some historical context here. And first, in the state of Alabama, in 2016, we know that this is a Republican stronghold in the general election. Donald Trump carried the state with around 63% of the vote. Hillary Clinton had around 35% of the vote. In Lee County in particular, a county, as you can see, there's a whole belt here of Democratic votes with a lot of African-American votes in this belt. Montgomery County, obviously, with Montgomery, where Selma is just to the west. But Lee County, kind of the one state in this belt that remains conservative. Kind of contrary to what you might believe with a major university and a high student population, a young vote, but nevertheless, Lee County conservative, just under the state average, 59.5% or so for Donald Trump in the 2016 general election in Lee County. When we look at what happened in the 2016 Senate race, Richard Shelby poll went just a percent or 2 above what Donald Trump did. He carried the state with 64% and remained in the Senate there. So going on to the Democratic primary, what kind of we're focusing on tonight. Hillary Clinton, this was a no contest for her. She won with 78% of the vote here in Alabama, 19% for the Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. And when we take a look at the map, every single county for Hillary Clinton. This is not a state that Bernie Sanders is expected to do well in tonight. It's a state that, quite frankly, in the South, it's just not really his stronghold. He lost South Carolina easily on Saturday. He's already been projected to lose a couple states in the area. And so when we look at Lee County in 2016, 73.6% for Hillary Clinton, 25.4% for Bernie Sanders. So it was above what he got in the election as a whole. He was under 20%. He gets 25%. Some of it due to the Lee County vote. Some of it due to the fact that Auburn University, with a young college student base, that's what Bernie Sanders has built as his base, as his brand, is trying to get out the vote with the 18 to 24 demographic. However, when you look at the vote totals from Lee County, and we'll get to that in just a second, when you look at the vote totals, they were very low in Lee County. And so a lot of college students not actually voting in Lee County, not an opportunity for an absentee ballot in the state of Alabama. So not a whole lot of college votes with a university of 25,000 plus students. I believe there's only about 10,000 votes or so. And we kind of look for more historical data as a whole for this state, and we see a very similar number to what President Trump got in 2016. Despite Barack Obama winning re-election in 2012 quite handily, Mitt Romney carried the state with over 60%. He carried the state, or carried the county, with about 59%. So Lee County votes pretty similar to what, in the general election, pretty similar to what the statewide total is as far as in a conservative favor. And so when we looked at all that, really it was very similar to the state. And when we look tonight with what Bernie Sanders needs to do in this state, he needs to try and run it up in Tuscaloosa County, University of Alabama, and at Auburn, we're in Lee County here in Auburn. But Lee County has remained pretty consistent. It's remained to the point really, as you can see here, 2008, 2012, 2016. Almost the exact same percentage across the board with whoever the Republican ticket was, John McCain in 2008, Mitt Romney in 2012, Donald Trump in 2016, almost to a T. Same percentages across the board, no matter if it was Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, or who the Republican was. So Lee County has really remained a Republican stronghold for the statewide election as well. So with what Bernie Sanders is trying to do tonight, he's trying to build enough votes. If we go back to the statewide view, He's trying to build enough votes along right here in Lee County, up here in Tuscaloosa County. Actually, in 2016, some of his best work was done near the Huntsville area. He got 30-40% in some of the counties. But nevertheless, Bernie Sanders is going to have a tough night tonight in all likelihood in the state and in Lee County. As we've kind of noted, it's kind of followed the status quo. It's been pretty similar to what the statewide has done. So it's 7 p.m. The polls have closed, and I believe we move on.
Now it is 7 p.m. and the polls have now closed in Alabama. Additionally, the polls have closed in Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas. So we're going to be going live to the Lee County Election Center with our reporter, Andrew Coates.
I'm Andrew Coates, and we're currently at Lee County Polling Center. We're still waiting for results, but we will be giving you results as they come in throughout the night. Back to you at the studio, AJ.
So the Eagle Eye TV did run a poll amongst our viewers to see who our viewers believed would be the Republican candidate for the Senate and who would be the Democratic candidate for president. So starting off with the president, about 24% of our viewers said that they would be in favor of Pete Buttigieg being the Democratic candidate. Now, of course, Buttigieg has since dropped out, so it's going to be interesting to see not only tonight but also in the coming days where his supporters are going to support as their second candidate. Now, coming in at second, there was about a 21% favor for Bernie Sanders, and about coming in at third, a 17% favor for Joe Biden. Now, I do believe that those two, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, we're going to see do very successful tonight. They've already done successful in Virginia and Vermont, and as long as they keep the steam rolling, they're on track to score a lot of delegates tonight. Now, switching over to the Senate races, the Republicans that are running for the Senate candidates, our viewers voted about 53% in favor of Tommy Tuberville being the Senate candidate for the Republicans. Now, of course, there is some bias as Tommy Tuberville is the ex-head football coach at Auburn University. But coming in second, we saw Jeff Sessions at 19% and Bradley Byrne coming in third at 14%. Now, all bias put aside, I do believe that those three, Tommy Tuberville, Jeff Sessions, and Bradley Byrne, are going to have a close-knit race tonight. We'll be back with more after this.
Eagle Eye TV is predicting to call Joe Biden as the winner of Alabama. The total number of delegates at stake is 52, but based on the percentages, we'll have to decide the exact number of votes that he got. Now we're going to hear from other stations talking about who won in other states.
Through those doors, down the hall and to the left. It's one of many polling places in Northwest Arkansas where the community can cast their ballot. It's a place of impact where volunteers long to see fresh faces. A vote
Democrat, Republican, or not
for a voice designed by the nation's founding fathers.
If you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain.
According to the Pew Research Center, young voter turnout increased 79% from 2014 to 2018, but millennials will account for a smaller share in 2020. Unopposed Arkansas State Senator Lance Eads says amendments on the fall ballot impact all demographics.
One related to term limits, one related to highway funding, which is obviously here in our part of the state a huge issue.
Many Americans are on the cusp of casting their ballots for the first time. The Pew Research Center projects the leading edge of Gen Z will comprise 1 in 10 eligible voters.
We
we have worked really hard to engage our high schools in this area to make sure we're registering students at the age of 17 and a half.
Treasurer of Young Democrats Gabe Edwards says his RSO encourages political engagement, so college students not only vote in the primaries, but vote smart.
We've done voting drives. We table often in the union and right outside the union as well, and we always have voter registration forms to get students registered to vote.
Constituents will consider issues directly impacting their pocketbooks, and in local elections, you're not just a number, but a tiebreaker.
School board issues, local sales tax issues, local city council members. We have votes that are within 5 votes, 35 votes. So your vote does matter.
In the past, people in Washington County have been limited to voting at their precinct, but now constituents can vote at any polling place with a valid ID. Visit UATV on social media to learn how you can register. Reporting from the Washington County Courthouse, Ashlyn Brothers, UATV News.
Welcome to UATV News. I'm Sean Romberg.
And I'm Ashlyn Brothers. We're your University of Arkansas hosts ready to talk politics on the rolling Razorback Hills of Fayetteville.
Thank you for joining us.
March marks the time to exercise your constitutional right and voice your concerns with a vote.
Let's take a look at what students can expect to see on the Northwest Arkansas ballot.
The Democratic preferential primary ballot includes contested Democratic races sporting the President, Justice of the Peace District 7, and Constable District 2, plus the contested nonpartisan judicial general election race and contested annual school board candidates.
Now, the Republican preferential primary ballot includes contested Republican races featuring the Republican presidential candidates, Justice of the Peace District 4, and Constable District 1. And you'll have the option to vote on the contested nonpartisan judicial general election race and annual school board candidates.
Now, those who prefer to refrain from associating with a particular party can request a nonpartisan judicial general election ballot, though you'll only be able to vote for judicial candidates, annual school board candidates, and millages.
Now, this election consists of several unopposed candidates. On the Democratic ballot, for federal offices, you have Celeste Williams, U.S. Congress District 3, for state offices, you have Representative Megan Godfrey, State Representative District 89, and for county offices, you have Kenny Arredondo Loyola.
On the Democratic ballot, federal offices, Senator Tom Cotton, U.S. Senate, and for state offices, John S. Latour, State Representative, District 86.
Now, taking a closer look at some of the special election initiatives, on your screen, you'll see a description of the Washington County 1/4 of 1% local sales and use tax. This will take place over a period of 12 months and will be used to improve public safety communication systems.
Another issue that will be voted on will be the 1% local sales tax in Goshen. And lastly, there will be a 2% local sales tax and use for the city of Winslow. That tax would take effect on and after July 1st.
Now to the presidential polls. Bernie Sanders is in the lead at 29%. And trailing behind him is Joe Biden at 17%. And then the most recent candidate to enter the race, Mike Bloomberg, at 15%.
And Sean, this is an important thing to take into account. Bloomberg has an office here in Fayetteville. He visited Little Rock not too long ago and visited Northwest Arkansas on February 27th. Plus, Elizabeth Warren was in the state this past weekend, so a big question to consider here. Could this influence the young vote?
Absolutely. And now Arkansas is considered to be a red state. We've got Governor Asa Hutchinson, Senators Tom Cotton and John Bozeman, and Congressmen Steve Womack, Rick Crawford, Bruce Westerman, and French Hill, all members of the Republican Party.
That's right, Sean. As of now, there's only one Republican challenger to Trump, 1990s governor of Massachusetts and former federal prosecutor William Weld. Weld continues to be very vocal about his opposition towards Trump since the 2016 election, when he ran for VP as a libertarian with Gary Johnson. And that's all the time we have for this UATV Special Elections Razorback Report.
From Arkansas to Auburn, I'm Sean Romberg.
And I'm Ashlyn Brothers. Have a great week.
Hi everyone, I'm Mara McDilton. And I'm Nicole Painter here from the Volunteer Channel at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Today, Tennessee joins 13 other states nationwide in Super Tuesday.
Over 1,300 delegates are up for grabs today in these 14 states, Tennessee making up for 122 of those, 64 Democratic delegates and 58 Republican delegates.
Last year, Trump took nearly 40% of the Super Tuesday vote here in Tennessee and is expected to win this year's nomination with no problem. But the Democratic primary is looking pretty close.
That's right. According to 538, Biden is predicted to lead Tennessee today with 29% of the vote, Sanders with 23%, and Bloomberg not too far behind with 21%.
With those numbers so close, the Democratic primary in Tennessee is definitely going to be interesting. In fact, 2 Bloomberg campaign offices have been vandalized here in East Tennessee over the last 2 weeks.
And Bloomberg has made a few stops in Tennessee over the past couple of months, but the latest candidate to make an appearance in Tennessee was Amy Klobuchar on Saturday right here in Knoxville.
And so far in Knoxville, the voter totals are extremely close with less than 400 vote difference between the Democratic and Republican primaries.
It's definitely going to be an interesting Tuesday here in Tennessee, and results will continue to come in tonight through 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
Thanks for checking in with us at the Volunteer Channel at the University of Tennessee. I'm Mara McJilton.
And I'm Nicole Painter.
Good evening, Eagle Eye TV, and happy Super Tuesday. I'm Edgar Studio with CTV 11 in Fort Collins. This Super Tuesday is set to be a big one in Colorado, with us voting on the same day as giants like Texas and California, which moved up their primary this year. Now, this Super Tuesday is going to have plenty of firsts here in Colorado as well. This is going to be the first time that we are holding a primary in about 20 years. After the 2016 election, both parties in the state decided that switching back to the primary was necessary after Democrats were worried about large crowds and Republicans felt that it was unfair that the 2016 caucus was canceled. Now, this is also going to be the first time that Colorado is going to allow unaffiliated voters to participate in the presidential primary. Unaffiliated voters in Colorado are the largest voting bloc, and that could be a huge indicator of how the election turns out. Now, the state is also focusing a lot on younger voters in the state, with 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the general election being allowed to vote in this Tuesday's election. Now, the college vote, which is usually pretty low in elections, is also being turned out here in Colorado as well. The state passed a law that mandates voting centers on college campuses, so we could see bigger turnout there. The Latino vote here in the state is also one to keep an eye on, so there's 3 huge voting blocks in the state to keep an eye out for. But let's take a look at last time's primary here in Colorado. Here's what the 2016 primary looked like in Colorado. The state went 59% voting in favor of Sanders. As you can see, most of eastern Colorado, with a few exceptions out in the west, voted in favor of Hillary Clinton. So definitely the more conservative parts of the state voted in favor of Hillary Clinton, with most of the state going in favor of Sanders, and especially along the Front Range where the big population center is at, that definitely went in favor of Sanders. Now, the latest poll to come out just this week had Bernie Sanders up 27% with Democrats and unaffiliated voter, and this poll was from Magellan. The last poll to come out was Emerson College's poll back in August, which had Sanders in a comfortable lead of winning the primary. He was polling ahead of Warren and Biden, who trailed behind, and Bloomberg was polling around 10%. Here in Colorado, Bloomberg also stands out because he spent the most money in the state, with pouring about $5 million in ads, which makes him the top candidate in terms of spending here in the state. Bloomberg has also heavily focused on the issue of guns in the state, even getting the endorsement of State Senator Tom Sullivan, who lost his son in the Aurora Theater shooting. Now, the other big race to take a look at here in the state of Colorado is the Senate race, which is set to get the national spotlight, with Republican Senator Cory Gardner, who's up for re-election. He is probably the most vulnerable senator in the Senate right now. The Sabato Crystal Ball election had recently said that Colorado's Senate race will lean Democratic before it was a toss-up, so it'll be interesting to see that one. The changes was Gardner's low approval rating in the state, where 30% of voters gave him a favorable rating. The poll even found that President Trump has a more favorable rating among Cory Gardner supporters than Cory Gardner himself. So the state primary is still a ways away, but Coloradans will have to wait till June 30th to find out who will be on the Democratic ballot. But right now the race is pretty crowded, with 9 candidates looking to unseat Cory Gardner. So the top contender right now looks to be former Governor John Hickenlooper. Hickenlooper had a decent lead. According to the Emerson poll, he was up 13 points to Gardner. Hickenlooper has about 55% of the vote among registered voters throughout the state. He also leads with unaffiliated voters nearly 2-1, and in toss-up counties like the one here in Larimer County in Fort Collins, he also leads there as well. So it'll be an interesting race to see who comes out on top this Super Tuesday, and we'll probably have a better picture who will face off against President Trump. Thank you for joining us. Back to you in Alabama.
Hello, and welcome to the UVM-TV Election Special. I'm Jordan Schiller, reporting from Burlington, Vermont. In just 1 week, Vermont will be one of 13 states to vote in the Super Tuesday presidential primary elections. This primary will determine which two candidates will be facing off in the general come November. On the Democratic side, polling suggests that Tuesday's election in Vermont will be an absolute blowout in favor of hometown hero Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders is the junior senator from the state of Vermont. In 1972, he ran his first election in the state for U.S. Senate and got only 2% of the vote, running as a third party. In 1980, Bernie won his first election, becoming mayor of Burlington, Vermont's largest city. And now in 2020, he is a frontrunner in the race for the White House. Polling aggregate site 538 has Sanders looking to win about 50 to 60% of the popular vote in Vermont, with a very strong possibility of sweeping all 16 of the state's pledged delegates. At a very distant second is South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who is looking to win about 13% of the popular vote, himself followed by Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is polling at about 9% according to an RCP poll. Vermont has a reputation for being a very liberal state, but a closer look shows us that the more rural areas of the state lean more conservative. Bernie's work in the Senate for the dairy industry has done him a good amount to be in the good graces of those voters in those rural areas. Latecomer to the race, Michael Bloomberg, will be on the ballot. While the outcome of the primary in Vermont is definitely going to be a Sanders lock, what will be interesting to see is if any of those more moderate candidates can break the 15% threshold to come away from the primary with any of Vermont's delegates. Vermont has 16 of the 3,979 total delegates in the race. To be the nominee on the first ballot in the convention, a candidate would need to get 1,991 of those delegates. In comparison, Vermont might not seem like a very important state, but in a very crowded and very close convention, it is going to take every last delegate. On the other side of the aisle, Vermont's Governor Phil Scott has endorsed former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld in the Republican primary over the incumbent President Trump. Phil Scott, a moderate Republican and governor of a liberal state, called for President Trump's removal from office during the impeachment trial, and is again breaking Republican ranks by becoming the first governor to endorse President Trump's sole primary challenger. Weld's campaign hasn't been taken very seriously so far, so it'll be interesting to see if he comes away from Super Tuesday with any more delegates following Phil Scott's endorsement. Neither of Vermont's senators are up for re-election this cycle, and at-large Representative Peter Welch is facing no serious primary challengers. Two-term Governor Phil Scott will be up for re-election in November, and primaries for that election will be held on August 3rd. Turnout is expected to roughly match that of 2016, when 200,000 Vermonters came out to participate in the presidential primaries. Vermont has some of the most accessible voting laws in the entire country. Primary voting does not require a declared party affiliation, and you can register on the same day as any election. So any Vermonters who will be at least 18 years of age by the general election in November can come out and vote on March 3rd, Super Tuesday. That's the scoop from the Green Mountain State. This has been UVM TV, signing off.
Hi, and welcome to the University of Texas at Austin. I'm Bailey.
I'm Ryan. And I'm Walton.
And we're here to give you a breakdown in Texas politics and what to look forward to in 2020.
So let's start on the Democratic primary. Bernie Sanders has taken a newfound lead. Biden was leading for most of this race, but just this week, Sanders made a big sweep through El Paso, San Antonio, Austin, and Houston, and it has rewarded him with now 24% of Texas Democratic primary voters saying they're voting for him. Biden is in a close second with 22%, followed by Warren at 15% and Bloomberg at 10%. Now, you may remember back in 2018, Texas had a very contentious and popular Senate race between Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz. Beto ended up losing statewide by only 3%, and Democrats are hoping to recreate that in 2020. Right now, there are over a dozen candidates running for the 2020 Senate race to replace incumbent John Cornyn, who has been in Senate since 2002. Right now, the front runner in that race is MJ Hagar, who has about 22% of those dozen candidates, with Democratic primary voters saying they're voting for her, and she's raised more than everybody by about $2 million. Whether it promises to recreate the popular race we saw in 2018, we don't know, but Democrats are hoping to create that fire. Over here on campus, we are closely following the race for Congressional District 25 to replace incumbent Roger Williams. Julie Oliver and Heidi Sloan are running for the Democratic nomination there. Julie Oliver ran for Congress back in 2018 and lost to her incumbent by about 9 points, but she's hoping that by registering new voters and with increasing demographic trends, she will be able to close that gap in 2020.
Texas has been known in the past as a red state, with areas that are mostly rural and white. When it comes down to it, there's a theory that Texas is going to turn blue. We can't see that really happening in the next few years, though. When it comes to the presidential vote, Donald Trump takes the lead, as he does in the rest of the country. Looking at Congress, we see that many Republican incumbents face several Democratic opponents trying to take their seat.
Although the 2020 Democratic presidential election will probably take the spotlight in Texas, it is not the most important election. The two most important elections to look out for are going to be those of the Texas Senate and Texas House. There are 13 different seats in the Texas Senate that are up for election, but really only 10 of those are going to be competitive, and most likely the Republicans will keep their strongholds within that chamber. However, the Texas House is much, much different. The Texas Democrats only contain 67 of the seats within the chamber and need 75 seats to gain a majority. And that is very likely to happen, with Democrats targeting close to 17 different House Republican seats that are all very competitive races. Now, the reason why these two chambers are so important is because in the next legislative session during 2021, lawmakers will be able to decide and redraw districts based on the 2020 census numbers. So whether or not the Democrats take back the House and gain more power within the state legislature will be very impactful into the future of both parties.
Can't tell you exactly who's going to win in 2020. What we can tell you, that coming from a state that has a variety of opinions, the most important thing is respecting each other's votes. We need to be able to have that civil debate to work on improving our country. Now, from all of us here in Texas, hook 'em. And as long as you stay out of the Big 12, War Eagle. Reporting live from Texas Student Television, I'm Bailey.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Walton.
Thank you, Eagle Eye TV. You're watching Virginia Tech Television's Tech Tonight. Thank you for joining us for our Super Tuesday special. I'm Abby Coleman. The time has come to vote for the Democratic presidential nominee. On March 3rd, Super Tuesday, Virginia residents will come out and vote for the Democratic candidate they want to represent them in the 2020 presidential elections. Renata Pena joins us in the studio to give you the rundown of what you can expect on the ballot in the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Abby. This is what you can expect on the ballot this upcoming Tuesday. There will be no referendums, and there will also not be a Republican Party nominee to vote for. Instead, a Republican Party candidate will be chosen at the party convention. Now, you might have seen a lot more Democratic candidates on the sample ballots, but these are the final 8. We've got Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Mike Bloomberg, and Tom Steyer and Tulsi Gabbard. Now, again, these are the final 8 candidates that you can vote for this upcoming Tuesday. Back to you in the studio, Abby.
Thank you, Renata. Bloomberg, Sanders, and Biden are the top candidates among Virginia voters. That's according to a poll from Monmouth University.
Mike Bloomberg, who has made several visits to the Commonwealth, and Senator Bernie Sanders stand at 22% for voter support in Virginia. Former Vice President Joe Biden sits at 18%, and former Mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, has 11% of support. Senator Klobuchar and Senator Warren sit at single digits, with Warren coming in last, according to the poll. Most respondents say their vote could change come Super Tuesday. President of the Young Democrats of Virginia Tech, Rebecca Trinh, now joins us in the studio to discuss how voters in the Commonwealth could vote on Super Tuesday. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so what do you think the most important issues are in this election that will cause Virginia voters to vote one candidate over another?
So one of the biggest issues that I've seen throughout Democratic voters is healthcare. So again, talking about Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren having their Medicare for All plan and eliminating private insurance, which is very controversial to some people. But you also have the moderate candidates such as Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, who are bigger on having a public option.
Okay. And so I know that Bloomberg has put a really heavy focus on Virginia, even skipping the first 4 early primary states. So do you think that will cause him to come out on top of Virginia, or who do you think will come out on top and why?
I think it's a little too early to decide who was going to come on on top of Virginia, just because we haven't had our primary yet.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at polls, they're never fully accurate. And the last time that we've had a poll was way before Nevada, and we're hitting South Carolina soon. So I would wait and see. But I would definitely think he's making a strategy to go for the delegates, and he's trying to win the biggest percentage of delegates to win the nomination.
Okay. And so now, who do you believe has the best chance of defeating President Trump in the presidential election?
So I haven't personally decided on who I'm going to vote for, but I think looking at the polls and looking at the trajectory of candidates, I think Bernie Sanders is on track to win the nomination, potentially beating Donald Trump, but it really depends on turnout and who shows up to vote.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show, Rebecca. Tech Tonight is your student election headquarters. Reporter Shannon McCool has all the information you need to know to vote on Super Tuesday.
The Democratic primaries are rapidly approaching, with Super Tuesday just around the corner. Super Tuesday will serve as an important day as the Democratic nominations are narrowed down. Elizabeth Obenchain, the president of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery, provided information this past week on the importance of voting and her expectations for the voter turnout.
I think it's important maybe to remind students and others that anyone can vote. We don't register by Democrat or Republican in Virginia, so anyone can go to the polls. And again, I think it's sort of encouraged that if you turn out for a Democratic primary or a Republican primary, that you should be sort of morally obligated to vote that party in the fall election, but there's nothing that strictly says that. I think there's a lot of excitement about Super Tuesday, and I think there will be a very good turnout.
The upcoming primaries are rallying those who were unable to participate in the 2016 presidential election, and young voters are starting to become more influential than ever, as seen back in the 2018 midterm congressional election. Voting will occur right here in the Commonwealth Ballroom of Squires. The voting will begin from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. on March 3rd for Super Tuesday. This Super Tuesday will serve as the next Democratic battlefield as we narrow down the candidates for the 2020 presidential election. Remember to vote this coming Tuesday and make your voice heard in the Virginia Democratic presidential primary election. Reporting from Squire Student Center, Shannon McCool for Tech Tonight.
That's how Super Tuesday is looking here in Virginia. Remember, voting day is March 3rd. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next episode of Tech Tonight.
Welcome back to Eye on the Primaries with Eagle Eye TV. Now we're going to take a look at some of the states whose polls closed before Eagle Eye went live, including North Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia. Eagle Eye is predicting Vice President Joe Biden will take North Carolina, which has 110 delegates at stake. 20 of those delegates are already pledged to Biden, but based on percentages, we'll see where the rest of them go. The next state is Vermont, and Eagle Eye projects that Senator Bernie Sanders will take a percentage of the 16 delegates from that state. The next state is Virginia, which Eagle Eye is projecting Vice President Joe Biden will take with 99 delegates at stake. Tune in after the break to see why some of the candidates dropped out of the primary elections already.
Welcome back to Eye on the Primaries. Well, we've already called 4 different states. Now we're going to send it to Sydney and Samantha in the Eagle Eye studio with more on the primaries. Samantha?
We're here live to discuss the recent Democratic candidates who have dropped out in the past few days just before the primaries. We'll begin with Pete Buttigieg, who was the youngest in the field at 38 years old and an Indiana native who dropped out this past Sunday. Buttigieg has since endorsed Joe Biden.
So, Samantha, tell us more about where did Pete Buttigieg come from and what was his experience before the race?
So, before the presidential candidacy, Buttigieg was a relatively obscure mayor of an Indiana city of just over 100,000 people. Educated at Harvard and then Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship, he worked as an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve and worked as a McKinsey consultant. Buttigieg's first entry into national politics came early in 2017 when he ran unsuccessfully for the chairmanship of the Democratic National Committee.
All right. How would Buttigieg change the makeup of the Supreme Court?
Buttigieg had proposed or endorsed a handful of options for altering how justices are seated. Changing the system, he said, can make each new court appointment less of a political deathmatch between Republicans and Democrats. One plan Buttigieg had floated would establish a Supreme Court of 10 permanent justices, with 5 others rotating in on who could be seated only by an anonymous consent of the first 10. He's also considered having an appellate court judges serve rotating 1-year terms on the court.
Now, we know Mr. Buttigieg was a little different from some of the other candidates in the race, so just tell us more about that.
So, apart from being the youngest candidate, Buttigieg was also the first openly gay candidate to mount a major campaign for the presidency, and he was aiming to be the first mayor to go directly from City Hall to the White House. In 2018, he married Chasten Glesman, a school teacher from Michigan. Chasten Buttigieg has since become a prolific fundraiser in his own right, stumping for his husband at events across the country.
We're going to move forward to Amy Klobuchar, another Democrat who has since dropped out the race and endorsed Biden in the race, and also won 7 delegates during her time. The 59-year-old born in Plymouth, Minnesota, who currently lives in Minneapolis and Washington, D.C., was a former Hennepin County attorney before being elected to Senate in 2006. During her time in the race, she racked up 7% national polling average, and get this, 25.3 million individual contributions. That is a lot of money.
That's a big number.
That's a big number. Running as an experienced moderate, Klobuchar emphasized throughout her presidential campaign that a bipartisan approach may be the Democrats' best chance at winning the White House. In May, she released a $100 billion plan to combat an issue that was very personal to her, and that issue is going to be to combat drug and alcohol addiction and improve mental health care. She also unveiled a list of more than 100 actions that she vowed to take in her first 100 days as president if elected. She also released a detailed infrastructure plan and a plan to help seniors.
And what was her involvement with the Kavanaugh hearings?
So Klobuchar drew national attention during the Senate's confirmation hearing for Kavanaugh, who was President Trump's second Supreme Court nominee. Klobuchar asked him during that trial whether he had ever blacked out drinking. "Have you?" he shot back, to which she calmly replied, "I have no drinking problem, Judge."
And does Ms. Klobuchar actually get things done?
Klobuchar often focuses her attention on issues that can attract bipartisan support, like many of the ones she addressed in her first 100-day plan. In general, she staked out more moderate claims than some of her Democratic competitors on broad issues like climate change and health care. Her bipartisan approach to politics has won her praise from colleagues on both sides of the aisle and helped her pass dozens of bills during her time in Congress. I think it's also important to mention that Klobuchar was hugely popular in Minnesota and coasted to victory last November in a state that President Trump nearly won in 2016. Klobuchar loves to remind voters that she kicked off her presidential campaign amid a snowstorm in Minneapolis in front of supporters sporting snow pants and ski goggles who turned out by the thousands. And finally, we're going to talk about Tom Steyer, the Democratic nominee from New York, 62 years old, who lives in San Francisco that has also recently dropped out. He started the hedge fund Feral Capital and funded political groups, including Need to Impeach and Next Gen America. He had no prior elected office before running and had a 2% national polling average during his time in the race. He also racked up $2.9 million in individual contributions as a progressive outsider with a business record. His calling for terms in Congress, decriminalizing illegal border crossings, and expanding the Supreme Court were some of his top priorities, and in breaking the influence of corporations and addressing climate change.
And just how rich is Tom Steyer?
He is pretty rich. Tom Steyer released more than a decade of tax returns that showed more than $1 billion in earning, including nearly $110 million in taxable income in 2017 alone. He has become one of the largest Democratic financiers in the country, spending more than $300 million on politics between 2014 and 2017. That money can be attributed to his founding of his investment firm, Farrell Capital, in the 1980s, which he left in 2012.
And what was his involvement with the impeachment?
So Tom Steyer founded the group Need to Impeach, and that group has been appeared in many television ads asking for Mr. Trump to be impeached. Some ran on Fox News in an effort to get Donald Trump's attention. In January of 2019, Mr. Steyer announced that he would not run for president to focus on impeachment efforts, but by July of that year, he reversed himself and declared himself as a candidate in the race.
And is Steyer considered a moderate or a progressive?
During the race, Steyer sold himself as a businessman who can challenge Mr. Trump on economic matters. But he was not casting himself as a moderate. He embraced a wealth tax on the super rich, not unlike one proposed by Senator Elizabeth Warren. He has suggested adding some new justices to the Supreme Court, a relatively radical idea pressed by some on the left. He wanted to take an emergency action to address climate change, and in many ways, he ran his ticket as a populist outsider, much in the way that Mr. Trump did in the 2016 election. That's all we're going to have for you guys on the recent dropouts from the Democratic side. My name is Sydney Sims.
And I'm Samantha Avila, back with more in the studio.
Thank you, Samantha. After the break, we're taking a look at the Alabama Senate race, plus a look at the amendment voters saw on the ballot today. You're watching Eye on the Primaries, and we'll be right back. With more on the primaries, so next up we have the Senate election. Auburn Placement editor Elizabeth Hurley broke down what the Senate looks like. Elizabeth?
Well, thanks, Sam. Welcome and happy Election Day, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Eagle Eye TV. I'm Elizabeth Hurley. Typically, I work for the Auburn Plainsman, but today I'm joining the Eagle Eye staff to help break down Super Tuesday. One of the biggest races in Alabama today is the Republican Senate primary. There are 4 main candidates in this primary race: former U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, former Auburn football coach Tommy Tuberville, Congressman Bradley Byrne, and former Judge Roy Moore. The winner of this race will face incumbent Democrat Senator Doug Jones. He was elected in December 2017 after Senator Sessions was appointed to serve as Attorney General under President Donald Trump. Senator Sessions once served in the role he's now running for again from 1997 to 2017. When Sessions moved on to his new role, a special election was held in December of that same year. Democrat Doug Jones and Republican Roy Moore ran for that seat, with Jones ultimately winning. There was a lot of controversy surrounding this special election after a close campaign where there were allegations of sexual misconduct came out against Judge Moore in the days before the election. Moore then stopped campaigning with about a week to go until Election Day. Now Senator Jones continued to campaign. He ended up winning the election with 57.4% of the vote. Judge Moore had about 40.6% of the vote. Alabama currently has 1 Democrat and 1 Republican senator. Other candidates in today's race include former Auburn football coach Tommy Tuberville. He began his coaching career in 1976 and served as Auburn's head football coach from 1999 to 2008. He retired from coaching in 2016. Congressman Bradley Byrne currently serves as the representative of Alabama's 1st congressional district. He's held that role since 2014. Judge Moore served as the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court from 2001 to 2003, and most recently from January 2013 to April 2017. He was suspended from the court in May 2016 to when he resigned in April 2017 after several cases and appeals regarding charges of ethical violations he received in May 2016. Shortly after he resigned, he announced his candidacy for the special Senate election. Now, let's take a look at the latest polls. The most recent poll, conducted by Mason-Dixon Polling and Strategy from a poll taken February 4th through February 6th, has Sessions polling at about 32%, with Tuberville at about 29%. Byrne is sitting at about 17% and Moore at about 5%. This is with 16% undecided and a 2% of people voting for unnamed candidates in the poll. Now, this poll has a 5% margin of error. That means that because Sessions and Tuberville are within 3 percentage points of one another, they are within the margin of error. So the race is very tight and could possibly lead to a runoff tonight. Let's take a quick look at some of the possible election outcomes with our topmost polling candidates versus our incumbent. Alabama tends to be a red-leaning state. Alabama tends to be a red-leaning state, so especially in general elections. So as you can see here from the same Mason-Dixon poll from earlier in February, a Sessions versus Jones election puts Sessions on top by about over 10%. A similar outcome is also in store for a Tuberville versus Jones election, with Tuberville sitting at about 8% more than Jones. This is all, of course, remains to be seen as results come in this evening. The winner of this Republican primary will face Jones in the general election on November 3rd, 2020. Thanks again, Sam.
And we're back with Tiger Communications political expert Ryan Lavoie to talk some trends about the primaries. Ryan?
So when we look at this Senate race in Alabama, let's first look back at the context of the 2016 Senate race between Richard Shelby and what we saw here is 64% statewide, very similar to the general election in that blue belt, a lot of African American voters in that area. Jefferson County got a lot of votes in Metro Birmingham. As you move out to the suburbs in Shelby County, the more affluent area of Birmingham, back to conservative. Up in Huntsville, conservative. Really, most of the state conservative, but this blue belt all the way across, with the exception of Lee County. You saw 64.1% for Richard Shelby. That did not change in Lee County. It was the exact same percentage for the incumbent senator who won re-election in 2016. So Lee County kind of trending with the state. Once again, we saw in the Democratic primaries that Bernie Sanders was just able to get a few more percent in Lee County than he did statewide. We saw it in the 2016 general election when Donald Trump won about a similar percentage, just a couple percent less in Lee County. And we see in the Senate race. Now, here's kind of the curveball. 2017. Doug Jones, Democrat, was able to win the seat vacated by Jeff Sessions and was able to beat Roy Moore, a very flawed candidate, by a close margin, 50% to 48%. And look how the state changed. Remember, blue belt, across Montgomery, Selma, nearing Lee County and its bordering counties. Jefferson, much stronger in the blue. Tuscaloosa County in the blue, where the University of Alabama is. Up in Huntsville, blue. Down in Mobile, blue. Population centers that are still leaning conservative in a state like Alabama, they went blue for Doug Jones in 2017, filling the seat vacated by Jeff Sessions. And so when we look at Roy Moore, who is in this primary, I should mention first Lee County's vote total, we saw it as being red in the general election, red in the 2016 Senate election for Richard Shelby. It was decisively blue for Doug Jones in 2017. One of the keys, Doug Jones was able to get what is a conservative county and turn it blue. So when we're looking at this Senate race here in 2020, Jeff Sessions trying to win his seat back, what Jeff Sessions is going to have to do, or what anybody's going to have to do in the Republican primary, is they're going to have to convince these voters that they lost in Lee County. I'm the right guy to take on Doug Jones. And so we have a primary tonight, obviously. We have Tommy Tuberville, the former Auburn head coach. We have Jeff Sessions, the former senator. We have Bradley Byrne in a third-place challenger position. But ultimately, it's going to come down to votes along Lee County. It's going to come down to votes trying to get some of these counties back in the western part of Alabama, up in Huntsville, down in Mobile. And so really what we've seen in Lee County, though, is Lee County usually is pretty traditionally Republican, but like the state did in 2017 against a very flawed Roy Moore, it went Democrat. It went blue. So the key for the Republican primary tonight, we got a 1% of the vote in or so, and a close lead for Jeff Sessions tonight. We'll watch to see if anyone can get to the number to avoid a runoff. Likely not. Likely we will see a scenario where we have a runoff between the top two candidates. But if you're able to get these Lee County votes, you're able to get the votes down in Mobile, those kind of population centers will be key for the Senate election. We've seen Lee County be a pretty good indicator of what's happening statewide. Sam, back to you.
Thank you. We have an update for the poll count here for the current delegate count, with Biden right now with 153 of the current delegate count. We have Mr. Bernie Sanders at 95, Buttigieg at 26, and those three right now are currently running away with the delegate count. And so after the break, we'll be right back with Eye on the Primary and talk more about the primaries. Thank you. Welcome back to Eye on the Primaries, and I'm joined by Ryan Lavoie of Tiger Communications, and we're going to go over some of the primaries I've already closed throughout the day. So Vermont, The winner was Bernie Sanders with a total of 16 delegates and 6 pledged. What does this mean for the state of Vermont?
Well, it's a state he had to carry. It's his home state. It's the senator from there for a long time. What we look at throughout the night is the margins. Can anyone else be viable? I know it's just 16 delegates. It's not a big prize compared to certainly a California or a Texas tonight. But can Joe Biden steal a delegate or two here and there? And so in that state, I saw earlier tonight that Bernie Sanders was getting over 50%. That's what he needs to do. He needs to run it up in some of those Northeast states. And so Vermont, no surprise, he polled well there. He's from there. Quite essentially, you have to win a state like Vermont. You got to win your home state in the primary. So Bernie Sanders is doing what he needs to do there.
And now in the state of Virginia, the winner was Joe Biden. Total delegates was 99, with 40 of them pledged to Biden, 17 to Sanders, and 1 pledged to Warren. What does that mean for the state of Virginia?
So Virginia's a state that was up for grabs 1 week ago. There's a lot of momentum for Joe Biden in this race, and Virginia is the evidence of that. 1 week ago, Joe Biden's campaign taking on water. Quite honestly, he was in big trouble, and that's something that Michael Bloomberg was trying to play off of. That's why he entered the race. That's why he paid $234 million of campaign spending, because he wanted to be the moderate choice, the moderate opposition to Bernie Sanders. What happened is Joe Biden was right. He had a wall in South Carolina that he was able to hold on to and win that state decisively with the endorsement of Jim Clyburn, the House whip. That really got his momentum back. You see Pete Buttigieg drop out. You see Amy Klobuchar drop out. Those then endorsing Joe Biden. All momentum for a state like Virginia tonight, to where it went from Bernie Sanders could win this state, he could win it by a couple points, to Joe Biden winning this state decisively, a South Carolina-sized victory. And so he's going to get at least 40 delegates or so, as you said. He's going to end up with even more than that because of the margin he's running up tonight. Virginia is kind of the biggest indicator we have of how much momentum Joe Biden really has.
And now on to North Carolina, with the winner there being Joe Biden. And he received 20 pledges out of the 110 total delegates. That's a wide margin right there.
Right. So the night's young there in the vote counting. And in the Republican primary, traditionally, we're accustomed to whoever wins the state gets all the delegates. And the Democratic process is different. The Democrats do it proportionally. When you hear the number 15% tossed around as viability a lot. That's why we can't allocate delegates until all the votes counted, because a candidate could get the difference between 17% and 13% is the difference in 10 or 15 delegates and no delegates in a state like North Carolina. So that's why we've only been able to allocate a few for Joe Biden. He will get plenty more. It was very early in the voting process as we came on here, so we'll see what that margin is. But once again, it's a state that Bernie Sanders thought, with the momentum he had earlier in February, that he might be able to win the state of North Carolina. But unfortunately for him, this momentum, Joe Biden just doing a wondrous job with the African American community, winning them 50, 60%, and Bernie Sanders polling in the teens. That's a big play for Joe Biden in southern states. That's why he's won some of these southern states. That's why he won South Carolina. And so North Carolina, another example of being able to win the African American vote with all the momentum from the endorsements of Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Well, we have another state to call with Delaney Byro here to bring you some more news. Delaney, what do you have to have for us?
Welcome back. Now we're going to the results are in from Oklahoma. So Eagle Eye projected that Vice President Joe Biden will win the delegates, most percentage of delegates from Oklahoma. We'll be back with more results later. Keep watching Eye on the Primaries with Eagle Eye TV. Welcome back, where we have more state results for you. Eagle Eye is projecting Vice President Joe Biden will win Oklahoma. The delegates at stake are 37, but based on percentages, we will determine how many exactly he will get. Next up is Colorado. Eagle Eye is projecting Senator Bernie Sanders will win Colorado. There are 67 delegates at stake, but based on percentages, we'll decide exactly how many delegates he will get. Now sending it over to Sam on an update on the amendment status.
Alabama is one of 3 states tonight voting on an amendment or referendum. Amendment 1 on Alabama's ballot deals with the State Board of Education. Eagle Eye reporter AJ Rivera broke down what this amendment would change in the state's education department.
There's a new amendment up for voting in this year's primary election. Titled Amendment 1, this new amendment would rename the State Board of Education to the Alabama Commission on Elementary and Secondary Education. Currently, the State Board is elected and the superintendent is appointed by the board. Alabama is one of 11 states that elects their school boards, and one of 6 where the board then appoints the superintendent. Other states include Michigan and Utah. The new amendment would change the board from being elected by voters to being appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. The title of the State Superintendent of Education would also be changed to the Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Education. The new amendment would align Alabama with 12 other states, including Kentucky, Florida, and Arkansas. If this amendment passes, it would be the 947th amendment to the Alabama Constitution, which is already the longest constitution in the nation. The amendment is one of the big talking points of Governor Kay Ivey's State of the State address. She states, "We've become too complacent on being at or near the bottom of national education rankings." Citing the nation's report card, Alabama is 49th in terms of reading and 52nd in terms of math. Governor Ivey claims too many of our high school graduates simply aren't ready for college or a career, and has high hopes that the new amendment will improve education in Alabama. As votes come in, Eagle Eye will keep you informed on whether this amendment passes or not.
We have an update on the Amendment 1 vote send-off, with 1% of the reporting, with the no vote leads with the 69% of the vote. We'll be back with more primary election coverage after this. But first, Governor Kay Ivey spoke about Amendment 1 during a State of the Address, throwing her support behind the amendment.
During last year's session, the legislature gave the voters of Alabama an opportunity to help move our education system in a bold new direction by having the opportunity for voters to vote on Amendment Number 1, which will be on the March 3rd primary ballot. But unfortunately, y'all, we've gotten all too complacent at being at or near the bottom of national education rankings. Surely we care about our students. Surely we care that they learn and do well and score high. But ask yourself this question. Is there any high school in Alabama, much less any college or university, that will continue to keep a head coach who produced teams that are consistently dead last? With Auburn or Alabama? You know the answer to that. And sadly, too many of our third graders are not proficient in reading. In fact, according to the nation's report card, we are 49th in the nation in reading, and we are 52nd in the nation in math. And y'all, it only gets worse as they get older. Too many of our high school graduates simply are not ready for college or a career. So let me be abundantly clear. This is not the fault of our hardworking teachers, principals, or local superintendents. Folks, it all starts with the system at the top. Alabama is only one of 6 states that has an elected school board, and this board has selected 5 superintendents in the past 5 years. Very simply, Amendment Number 1 will create term limits for the state board, and no member will serve more than 2 6-year terms, thus bringing fresh ideas to the commission every few years. And equally important, the newly constituted board will reflect the racial, gender, and geographic diversity to reflect the makeup of students in our public school system. There's just no other way to say it, folks. The system is not working. And for us to prepare today's students for tomorrow's opportunities, it's time we get serious. It's time for term limits. It's time for accountability. It's time for stability. It is time to vote yes on Amendment Number 1 on March 12th.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking to Eagle Eye reporter Lainey, who was at the polls earlier today, bringing you more information.
Showers and thunderstorms didn't stop these voters from voting this Super Tuesday. Cars swarmed into the Boken Community Center, filled with eager voters this president primary season. Holding a Doug Cannon sign in front of the center, Ricky Smallridge expressed to Eagle Eye TV how his choice candidate will make a difference in the Lee County area.
So I'm here to endorse my friend Doug Cannon. He and I have been friends for a long time, and he's running for Lee County Commissioner, District 1. And anyway, he's been a home builder for years around here, and he knows a lot of people out in the community and gets out in the community, and he's the kind of guy that won't sit behind a desk. He likes to get out, and he'll be with the people and trying to help them all he can.
Joanne Dow shared with Eagle Eye TV why Joe Biden is her choice for candidate.
I think Joe Biden will get our country back to where it was. It's divided right now, so that's why I voted for him, because I think he would be the right person to be in the White House. He's a decent person, and that's why I voted for him.
Nadine Payne expressed why she voted and urged those in the community to vote as well.
I voted because we are in crucial times and everything is so messed up in the White House, so we do need to vote. So anybody that's at home laying in the bed or whatever you're doing, please get up and come and vote. We had so many of our ancestors who fight for this right to vote. So I think all the people of color need to vote. So please come out to the Barkin Center or wherever you are signed up to vote. Come out and vote today.
This has been Lainey Mayfield reporting for Eagle Eye TV.
And we have some breaking news in the primaries in Tennessee with Delaney Barrow having more.
Welcome back. We have an update from the state of Tennessee. Eagle Eye projects that Vice President Joe Biden will take the state. There are 64 delegates at stake, but based on percentages, we will find out the exact number of voters that he will take. Tune in after the break to catch up more and get live updates on With the Primaries with Eagle Eye.
Welcome back. Here are the names for the Republican Senate race. Roy Moore, Tommy Tuberville, Bradley Byrne, Jeff Sessions, Arnold Mooney, and Ruth Page Nelson. Stanley Adair. We reached out to all of them, and only one of us can get to us back, and that would be Ruth Page Nelson. We sat down with an interview with her.
Hello, welcome to Plain Talk. I'm your host, AJ Rivera, and we are joined today by Senate candidate Ruth Page Nelson. Ms. Nelson, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here.
Of course. So, can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I am a microbiologist and a chemist. I went to the University of Florida. Then I married an electrician over in Atlanta, where we had 3 children. We moved to Dothan, Alabama in 2005. I also became a master electrician and a solar trainer. So my focus has been as an entrepreneur to create opportunities inside of our communities. What led me to politics is a very interesting route because I never planned it. I basically like to provide for others as well as myself. I don't think there is any enjoyment in just the big house on the hill by yourself. So I like to see the community come up and about. So I started to initiate a training program down in Alabama, Dothan, after my children went to college and they attended Auburn. And I was moving my business, which I had incubated at Auburn Research Park for 3 years. From here, I was going to move it to Atlanta, but I was invited to bring it to Dothan. And when a Green Jobs Training Center didn't work out, I couldn't figure out all the kinks. So I started to hold meetings and people started to come out and they had some of the strangest stories you've ever heard, and I wound up being called a community activist. So I got thrown into this. So that's a little about my background. That's how I got to become interested in representing others.
Gotcha. So why are you choosing now to start your campaign to enter the political field?
Well, as I said, we had worked very diligently in Dothan to overcome some of the issues that I believe are pertinent to moving a community forward. If we don't sit at the table and allocate the resources and direct them back to the certain communities that are affected, they won't be a part of the next generation's accomplishments. Say, for instance, how often do you see artificial intelligence displayed in communities of color are even represented. When new technologies come out, we're not there. I was a forerunner on the solar program back in the energy efficiency stimulus money type situation. I was in a meeting with Matt Rogers of McKinsey and Company, that's Buttigieg's company.
Yeah.
And he was standing there and he said, of the $600 million, most of it is going to you in this room. I had traveled from Dothan with the idea, even the city of Dothan had made me an envoy, with the idea that we would compete on smart grid money, and there were going to be 3 equitable fundings of $200 million. To have this man stand there and say there's only going to be, all of it's going to these people in this room, I was confused. So I asked Stephen Chu, who was then the Secretary of Energy, did you set aside any money for minorities and women? He ignored me. They routed me over to Independence Avenue, 1000 Independence Avenue, where the answer was no. Later on, at a dinner, a man came behind my chair, Eric Leitner. He was like assistant to the Undersecretary of Energy. And he was very confident. He said, there won't be a third funding. There may not even be a second. There wasn't a second. $600 million was allocated to people who had already known about it. And this gentleman, he was working for McKinsey and Company. Then he was hired by the Department of Energy. And when Buttigieg started talking about his tenure with McKinsey and Company during 2008, because this was 2009, or he had a tenure right in that period with them regarding the energy as a means of stimulating our economy. I looked up Matt Rogers. He's now a senior partner at McKinsey and Company. So our government hired him. He allocated $600 million at least. I don't know if he allocated all the $88 billion that was in the Department of Energy. But if you look over the outcome for even Alabama, for minorities, for young people to actually participate, it's predetermined in a way in my mind, and this is what we're running into over and over again. So if we're not at the table, like I always believe, if you're not at the table when the pie is served, you're going to get crumbs.
Gotcha.
And I believe now Alabama is in a position where we can actually lead the whole country. Not only replanting of trees, we have a lot of clean cut areas, we can do the Trillion Trees Initiative. No matter what, you have to balance your environment. So that can be done with our clear-cut lands. We've just created a new branch of the military.
Yeah.
Look at the potential for even Auburn with aerospace engineering. And Huntsville, our deep resource, we can lead on those types of things by developing programs. So I don't think people think like me a lot. And I don't know that we can move the ball forward and include all the younger people with a means of keeping this talent in Alabama. We have to do more to stop the brain drain.
Got you. Well, so can you tell us a little bit about your experience so far on the campaign trail?
It's been very, very mixed. Have you ever tried to get someone to support you and your minority and your woman? You're in Alabama and you're Republican, right? So you try to explain to people why the Second Amendment is important. You don't want gun control because the Second Amendment allows us to have the right to bear arms. That right to bear arms is to keep our government from overtaking us. So I saw a very big display in Kentucky, in the capital of Kentucky the other day. And I actually applaud those types of things. I'm not a person who is afraid of my gun. I believe, like the president, he's allocated $25 million to see what is causing the gun violence. If you go back again to when middle management came in and they started to downsize companies, IBM went around when they announced they were going to announce that they were no longer a lifetime employer. They went around to the local gun shops, according to an article that I read, and asked them to close for a few weeks while the people could absorb it. The term going postal was coined in the early 90s. Have you heard of that term, going postal?
I have heard of it.
That's taking a gun, going to your workplace, and just killing people. So these things came about as a result of our changing, the American dream changing. So my slogan is make the American dream real. We see it for other people. They come into this country. I had a neighbor, he was a painter from Mexico. He owned 3 apartment buildings because our money against their money is very valuable. But if you come in and you lower and you hold our wage down to a certain level for a long period of time, people begin to get frustrated. They cannot see the dream. They cannot survive. So it's very important that I can take time to explain to people why you really aren't a Democrat, but you vote for a person. You don't vote for a party. You make sure that the issues that are relevant to you, that you stand for. Small government. Why would you want the government to pay for your health care or your education? Why don't you ask the government to provide for you an opportunity to make enough money to choose whatever you want? Because the government is not, it's here to serve us, but not to, I'd say, control us. Because once you sign off a certain amount of things that you need for the government to do for you, you're literally giving up a lot of rights, and you're growing government to a point where it will eventually be very large, which it is very large now. And I feel that we need to cut back on a lot of our government sizing. People don't understand why they need a lot of things, and I think, why would someone need to give you if we're all in a free country with the right opportunities?
Gotcha. So what do you believe, I know you've talked a little bit about this, but what do you believe right now to be the most pressing issue in Alabama?
I believe it's our education system and the brain drain that we're experiencing. Our education system, our public system, is last in the nation. We must fix education, and we must provide for the people to be educated and remain in Alabama. I'd like to see a voucher program similar to that which the president has set in place for moving your child from a non-performing school, put in place to not only for that purpose, but for young people like you who are in college. You may wind up with a lot of loans at the end of your tenure, and you have to go get some high-paying job in New York City. Well, I would like to see a voucher program put in place so that we can get a commitment from you to remain in the community, and we pay off your loans and even subsidize the incomes to go to less populated areas and bring this talent that all these wonderful schools in Alabama have. I mean, look at our engineering programs. Look at these. I mean, we're just excellent with things that, imagine if we were putting out aerospace engineers and they have to go to another state. Why not build it here, you know? I'd like to see more research parks put around our schools so that our children, our students, and our young people being trained here, want to stay here and can make a competitive life here.
Got you. So
I think that's the most important.
Yeah. So kind of building off of education, there is a new amendment to the Alabama Constitution titled Amendment 1 about restructuring the way the state
Common
board,
Core.
the way that the state board is scheduled or structured, so to say. So instead of being the state board being elected by the people of Alabama, the new
Governor,
commission would be
the commission appoints
the new commission would be appointed by the governor. Where do you stand on that?
I believe that the power should remain with the people. That is one of the reasons I believe that we should empower the people at any point that we can. Leave it with the people, but inform them properly as to what has taken place to lead us to this point. You can't continue with the same protocols and thought processes and wind up with something different. Just taking that from the people, I'm not in agreement with that.
Alrighty. So, given that, Eagle Eye TV, we are a student-run TV station, what is your message for Auburn University students about why they should vote for you?
I believe that I have their best future in mind. I'm concerned that Auburn, first of all, I had 2 children who went here. I had a business that I incubated at the Auburn Research Park, Smart North America, which I love Auburn, and I know what students need, but we need you in Alabama most of all. I would create opportunities that would incentivize your staying in Alabama and being a leader of the pack so that we can staff the Space Force, so that when you get out, we have entrepreneurial opportunities for you. When I was in New York City competing on a project, Bloomberg, that was another, but he had a project where the students actually when people, it was called Startup New York. I'd like to not have other cities attract our students because the incentives just aren't here. We need to make, I will definitely support incentives for you to create any type business that you want, but the support that you get from these universities is second to none. I mean, I was able to put together packages. So what happened, I'm not trying to plug for New York at all. What I want you to understand is putting together the talent resources that we have right here in Alabama with Tuskegee, Auburn, engineering. You can partner with these schools and let this talent be on the resumes for competitive contracts all over this country. And this is what I did. I competed on a project there. It was called Greenlight New York. And this is, we have to get the favoritism and I would say corruption out of things. When it was all said and done, I got a call. It said, you have the best team. You have the teaching experience. We like you, but I want you to be a sub to the other guy because the mayor wants them to have it. That mayor was Bloomberg. So I said, it put me in perspective. You don't need to go all around, you need to bloom where you're planted. The best thing to do is fix what we have that needs to be overcome here together. Another thing we need to do is to set up community blue zone type environments so that people who want to live and work together, maybe it's a lot of techies, maybe it's people who just want to eat well and what have you, but we need the blue zone concept, not blue like Democrat, but the blue zones. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
They are calling it blue zones where people are working and living together and providing for each other the resources they need and living to well beyond 100 years old. I believe Alabama is perfectly suited for that type of an environment, but it's going to take the students to do it. It's going to take the newer generation to bring on new ideas. But we have to make legislation that will make it, attractive for you to live in a remote area. Mm-hmm. Because if you're a doctor or you're a lawyer and you don't have the resources to be in a remote area and your salary is not subsidized and your loans aren't paid, we're never going to maximize the potential here or attract other people to come here to be with you,
Yeah. Gosh. Yep. So there's obviously a lot of candidates that are running for the Republican ticket for the Senate.
Right.
How do you differ from those candidates?
Well, I'm a woman. I'm also a woman of color. Mm-hmm. I have a wide range of experience on the ground. I don't have a war chest, so I don't have the political background. I'm not from the swamp, so I'm not worried about going back to some place I was before, and I haven't done this before. I'm not a career politician. I believe that I can bring a new vision that represents most of America. When you talk about lawyers and prosecutors and attorneys general and things like that going to the Senate, those people aren't on the ground in the community working with the children. They're not mothers. They don't have the same perspective or experience or wisdom that I have. I believe that I bring a very different angle, and also having the close connection with the universities and the students for a long time, I see the vision of what can happen from the colleges, from the environmental, and also the communities of color. I have a very serious concern about justice when I have 3 young men as children, and they're likely 3 times more likely to be killed by the police than a person like you. This, I don't believe my opponents have even raised as an issue. But it's a serious issue for me because as a mother of color, ever since my children were about 12 years old, if they were out at night, I had to worry if they were going to make it home. And this, I believe, I can bring a compassion, but also just, not a compassionate view that lets people come in and hash out the differences and overcome these things. Because once we overcome the justice issue and a way to maintain our younger trained persons in the state, we will move up from that 49th, least desirable place to live. It's not the environment here. It's not our outdoors. It's not the friendliness of the people. It's not the NASCAR and the Alabama football that doesn't make people want to live here. It's pretty much the justice and the lack of understanding among the people, the lack of willingness to work and live together. And I say, this we shall overcome. I mean, we can overcome tomorrow. Why don't we all just walk across the bridge together? Decide we're going to live and work together. What differences we have and what things we have alike that we're going to share. So I bring a different perspective, and also the female part, women's rights. Mm-hmm. Women's rights are critical. And I don't believe that men understand at all that making legislation that's hardline legislation, that it would ever be appropriate without a woman's voice in that. So I'm very different from the other candidates, all of them.
So just kind of switching sides, how are specifically your policies different from those of Doug Jones?
Well, my policies are, first of all, I support Donald Trump, and I voted for him. My policies are for smaller government. It's not for one-payer Medicaid. I do not agree with that. I agree with the net that would be a temporary way for people to, if they were suddenly out of a job, out of work, or had a loss of a death in the family, it has to be a reason why you don't have the ability to pay. And if you don't have the ability to pay, you have to participate in a program of training and come up so that you can become self-sufficient. Okay, I believe in self-sufficiency. I believe that smaller government, we must make government smaller. Gun control, yes. We do not need any further encroachment on our gun rights. For the pro-life, I believe that we should be pro-life all the way throughout life. I have a different concept because of the killings in the community, but also abortion should never be anything other than a medical procedure. I believe that it should be left on the table as a medical procedure, because when I was in labor with my first child, I had a very bad incident where I had an epidural, and me and the baby were affected by it. And they were trying to make decisions as to who lived. But if it wasn't there as a decision at that point, I'd be dead now. So it has to be a medical procedure. That's I don't believe that it should be free and easy or anything outside of the medical profession. So Doug Jones' policies, I don't trust his policies, okay? And as a matter of fact, I'm concerned that the African American community gives their vote away often without requiring anything in return and without actually looking into the depths of what the value of their vote really is. And that, having things that they believe are free, they're not free at all. You're going to pay for them. And if you can become self-sufficient and not just simply check this side of the ballot or that side, then you can actually overcome a lot of the differences that we have. Because a lot of the differences are based on, I'm going to sit down and someone's going to give me something, and the other, the Republican side is basically do for yourself, be self-sufficient, be proactive, and don't let the government run us. So I'm very different. I'm definitely a Republican, because that's a challenge too, because, can you imagine only 8% of the registered voters actually voted for President Trump in the last election, the African American community. But if he gets only 5% this time, they're saying it's a shoe-in. So I intend to work really hard to explain to the African American community why you need to aspire to these goals rather than the goals of socialism.
So, what is the first thing that you intend on doing if you were to be elected into the Senate?
I would look at, again, how we restructure education, because not only is education last for our state, for the people of color, it's become a pipeline to prison. So it's tied intricately to the Department of Justice. So I believe that first of all, restructuring education, making people understand how they can take advantage of voucher programs, identify the shortcomings in each community, because some of it may be transportation, others is just, generational behaviors. We have to look into detail as how we can correct the educational system. If we don't correct the educational system, we're going to keep churning out the same results. Then after that is the justice system. Our justice system is overcrowded, overloaded, and there are a lot of issues. I applaud the president for cleaning up the Department of Justice. Many of the problems in our community are the failure of the Department of Justice to actually be proactive in a certain manner when certain people make certain complaints. So I want to definitely be a part of, bringing more justice to all of the people of Alabama. Our farmers, we have to do something about their margins. They lost a lot with the China trade deals and a lot of the international trade, what have you. I believe that if we can get more farm-to-table programs, get farmers higher margins so that they know who they're with guaranteed markets. For instance, I would like to see healthy food from our farmers put on the tables in our schools. Also, their cost of operations. I am a grant package for the Rural Energy for America program. I've written grants so that farmers can actually save on their energy costs. When we put our farmers, make our farmers strong, then we're in good shape. Our veterans, without farmers, food, and national security, we don't have a country. So I do applaud a lot of the programs for immigration control, because that has driven down a lot of our margins. And I think we have to be careful at the way we go about it so that we don't lose the workers before we transfer before we increase the margins. We have to increase these margins, but we can't lose our food supply. That is a very critical next program that I would look at. So first it would be education, and it's tied intricately to the justice system and our farmers and national security. I believe our veterans are the reasons that we are America. So that is something that the president has increased a lot of the programs and looked into those, and he's really kept a lot of promises. So I'm really pleased with that. And I want to be able to explain to our community how the criminal justice reforms actually have been, just beyond what other presidents have done. So mainly, though, fixing the youngest people first, starting with pre-K all the way through for education.
Absolutely. So is there just anything else you would like to say to the voters?
Well, yes, of course. I need your vote. I need you to vote for Ruth Page Nelson come this Tuesday, March the 3rd. I want to look out for all of Alabama. I am a Republican. I will definitely uphold the creeds and the beliefs that keep us free, keep us safe, and keep us independent. I want your vote. Please remember me. Vote Ruth Page Nelson, March 3rd. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's all that we have here today for Plain Talk. Again, a big thank you to Ms. Nelson for coming down here and speaking with us. I'm AJ Rivera in War Eagle.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Eagle Eye TV, where Delaney has some breaking news on another primary. Delaney?
Welcome back where we have an update on state polls. Eagle Eye projects Vice President Joe Biden will win Arkansas, which has 31 delegates up for grabs. Based on percentages, we'll find out the exact number of delegates Biden will take. Back to you, Sam.
Thank you, Delaney. We're going to send it live to Andrew Coates, who's at the Lee County Polling Center, for the update on the primaries.
Thank you, Sam. I'm Andrew Coates, live at Lee County Polling Center. And as Sam mentioned earlier, we have been here for 2 hours, and we're currently only reporting 50% of votes. We'll start off with the Republican Senate nominee. First, we have Tommy Tuberville, former Auburn football coach, currently at 49.41% of the vote, equaling 2,948 votes. In second place, we have Jeff Sessions at 27.6%, equaling 1,647 votes. In third place is Bradley Byrne with 14.35%, equaling 856 votes. For the Democratic presidential nominee, in first place we have Joe Biden with 62.37%, equaling 3,177 votes. In second place we have Bernie Sanders with 18% of the vote, equaling 917 votes. And in third place we have Michael Bloomberg with 9.27% of the votes, equaling 472 votes. Back to you, Sam, in the studio.
Thank you for joining us, and we will be right back with more after the break. And welcome back. Eagle Eye TV spoke with political groups across campus about what Super Tuesday means for them.
All right. Hi, my name is Adria Rivera, and we are here with the president of the Auburn College Democrats, Karsten. So, Karsten, just break us down. Going into Super Tuesday, talking specifically about the Democrats that are running for president, which of the candidates are in the best position to earn a lot of delegates?
So, someone that's expected to do really well and has to do really well is Vice President Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. He's expected to poll really well with the African American vote. But someone that's been pushing into that really well has been Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders has done a pretty good job of diversifying his vote. He did really well in the first three votes with Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. And a lot of people are expecting him to do a lot better in the Super Tuesday votes with Alabama and all the other states.
So, talking more specifically, Alabama, obviously it's a very Republican state. The last time that the Alabama delegates voted for a Democratic president was about 40 years ago. I believe that was Jimmy Carter. So knowing this, which of the candidates do you believe is going to do best in Alabama in getting those delegates?
Well, in the primary, I think that Joe Biden probably stands to do the best just because he does poll really well with the black electorate. The African American vote tends to be more conservative in Alabama, and Joe Biden is a more moderate candidate, someone that appeals to them, and there's the belief, or there's the connection with him to President Obama, and so he stands to do really well, I believe, during a lot of these Super Tuesday elections, especially in Alabama. Bernie Sanders is doing well, but we'll have to wait and see if he's doing well enough to get the more moderate vote.
So for the Democratic nominees, who really needs to score a lot of delegates on Super Tuesday, and who really just needs to stay relevant in the polling and wait for more votes to come?
So the person that probably has to improve the most is Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Buttigieg did really well in Iowa. He did well in New Hampshire. But there's a lot of questions as to whether or not he can win more racially diverse states, and that's going to be a big issue for him. President or Vice President Joe Biden has already shown that he polls really well in diverse states. Senator Sanders has shown that he polls really well. Buttigieg it's a little bit uncertain with him, so he's going to have to put a lot of work in to make sure that he gets his delegates that he needs.
Got you.
Welcome back, where we have the latest update on state polls. Eagle Eye predicts Vice President Joe Biden will win Minnesota, which has 75 delegates up for grabs. But based on percentages, we will decide how many votes exactly he got. Back to that interview.
The nominees, who do you think is going to be standing the best chance of beating President Trump when it comes around to November?
I think that it really depends on how the primaries end up. If there's one primary, or if there's one candidate that can take it all really well, like if Bernie Sanders or even Joe Biden or whoever gets a lot of the delegates in the primary, then it will strengthen the support behind that candidate. But if there's a brokered convention, or if there's some uncertainty as to where the Democratic Party should go, then I think regardless of who it is, then they're going to have a hard time. I don't think there are any candidates that have a particularly bad chance against President Trump. I do think that of them, Mike Bloomberg probably has one of the worst chances, just because he's viewed as basically the same thing as President Trump by a lot of Democrats. But other than that, there's a lot of vote blue no matter who rallying behind all of the candidates.
I know you brought up a brokered convention of how that potentially could not have a unified Democratic front, so to speak. If there was to be a brokered convention, why do you think that'd be? Because?
Well, a lot of that would probably come down to there are a lot of candidates in the mix right now, and Bernie is looking like he's going to take the primary. Just the way that it's trending right now, we don't know. Things can always happen, but with so many candidates in the race right now, it's pulling a lot of votes away from specific people. If it ends up just being between, say, Senator Sanders and Vice President Biden, then it's more likely that someone like Sanders will just take the majority. But if a lot of candidates do still stay in the race until the very end, you could see a brokered convention pretty significantly. It's throughout the primaries, it's been consistently the top, the most likely option, second most likely, third most likely, behind either Sanders, Biden, being one of those other three.
So are you really thinking that it's going to be a brokered convention between a more radical Democrat such as Bernie Sanders and a more moderate such as either Biden or Buttigieg?
Probably. Bernie has been doing really well. It's most likely that he's going to be somewhere near the top. As far as who comes after him, it's hard to say. It's most likely going to be Biden or Buttigieg. It really depends on how they do running up to Super Tuesday, how a lot of people perceive all of that. Biden was expected to do a lot better than he did in Iowa, and that raised a lot of doubts. Buttigieg did a lot better than expected, and so that raised a lot of support for him. But at the end of the day, you can never really accurately predict what happens in an election.
Got you. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think that it's just really important that regardless of who you support, that you go out and support that candidate in the primary, and that you get other people to support that whoever they support in the primaries, because getting people to vote in the general election is important, and the first step to do that is to make them aware of who's running in the primaries and make them aware of the policies and what's really at stake.
Awesome. Hi, we're here with Jordan Parker, who is a reporter at the Right Side Broadcasting Network. Jordan, thank you for sitting down with us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So just to start off the questions, so of the Democratic nominees, who do you believe is going to stand the biggest threat against President Trump come November?
Well, that's a great question. We've seen a big shakeup the past couple of days with Tom Steyer dropping out, Pete Buttigieg and Eamon Klobuchar just most recently dropping out this morning. And I think that's a very strategic move by the Democratic Party on a larger scale to push those supporters towards Biden. Biden's been struggling, hasn't won a single state until South Carolina yesterday, which has been very interesting to watch, surprising honestly, because from the beginning I was like, Biden has this one in the books, and all polls led to that as well. So I think as we've kind of gotten to this race and Biden has stumbled, the Democratic Party really got worried because Bernie, while he's the front runner, he's very, very polarizing. A lot of voters and a lot of Democrats I've spoken to, they're like, Bernie, this isn't our Democratic Party. This isn't our candidate. And Bernie worries them. Even staunch Obama supporters, Hillary Clinton supporters, Bernie is just not their candidate. So the party's been a little bit in disarray and very fractured since this field was so wide and since Bernie has been so polarizing. So at this point, I don't know that there is a big challenger to the president, in all honesty with you. I think Bernie, even if he locks up the nomination, which I find very difficult to believe with the DNC, just not behind him at all, while I think he may become the nominee, the Trump campaign wants Bernie to be the nominee. They want him to be the nominee because he's the easiest to beat. Because he is so polarizing, you're going to see a lot of moderate Democrats who are not going to vote for him, a lot of independents not going to vote for him. They're going to move over to the Trump side or stay at home. So I think Bernie, while he is the most popular right now, he doesn't pose a threat. And Biden, I would say he's a threat, but at the same time, you see so many gaffes. I mean, just today he called Super Tuesday Super Thursday. He said he worked and negotiated a climate agreement with Deng Xiaoping of China, who's been dead for 23 years and out of office for since 1992. Said he was running for the U.S. Senate. Said he was going to appoint the first African-American female to the U.S. Senate. So we don't see, while Joe Biden is the front runner, him on a debate stage with the president just, I don't think it'll end pretty. So to be honest with you, I don't see a strong contender to the president. The only person who I believe can pull over independents and some never Trumpers would be Mike Bloomberg. But at this point, he just doesn't have the support behind him and hasn't even been on the ballot until tomorrow, so we can't even gauge where he's at.
Mm-hmm. So I know you obviously just said that Mike Bloomberg hasn't been on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
He's set out the first 2 primaries and the first 2 caucuses.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't really joining the race on the ballot, at least, until Super Tuesday. Why do you think he's doing that?
I think because he got in so late into the race. I mean, I was just watching his town hall on Fox News, and that was kind of a question: is why weren't you in those states? And since he didn't get in until November, it was a long, short amount of time to prep for New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, Nevada, those really early states. And since they are such a small part of the electorate, there's not a wide demographic represented in those states outside of South Carolina. He didn't see a need to put money into those, which is a little bit odd, but at the same time, since he was a late entry, I can understand that. And he did get a head start in all the Super Tuesday states that the other candidates didn't. He's been running ads in Alabama, Texas, California, just blowing up the airwaves there to kind of build that support. And so we'll see him on Super Tuesday. That'll be the first really big test for him. His support has grown. His African American support has grown. But once the polls start coming in, that'll be the first time we can really tell if he's a contender or not.
Mm-hmm. So, switching parties, talking more about the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
So Donald Trump is not running unopposed, and typically the incumbent president wins their party's nominee for the coming year. But Bill Weld is still deciding that he's gonna run and see if he can beat Trump to be the Republican nominee. Why do you think Bill Weld has decided that he's gonna run, and do you think he actually stands a chance?
Every election cycle we see sometimes these fringe candidates who run for no other purpose than I believe just to run. I mean, they get a couple dozen votes here and there, but they don't. He doesn't pose a challenge to the president whatsoever. The president won over 97% of the vote in the Iowa caucuses, over I believe 98% of the vote in the New Hampshire primary. So there really is no challenge to the president. I mean, there's more people in the lines for the bathroom at Trump rallies than people that have voted for Bill Weld. I was with the president in South Carolina on Friday. I was with him in Arizona and Nevada last week, and just the sheer number of people that attend these rallies that the president holds is quite astounding. Tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of ticket requests. So it's really, if Bill Weld wants to run and spend his money, that's up to him. But there's, at this point, there's no reason to challenge the president with the amount of momentum, over $200 million cash on hand that the Trump campaign has. No one really stands a chance in the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm. So, backing it down away from the presidential candidates and focusing it more on the Senate, as that is a very big race we're seeing brewing in Alabama. The Republicans that are running for the Republican ticket to go up against Doug Jones come November. So, of the Senate candidates, who do you think is going to win the Republican primary?
If I had to guess, it's going to be Jeff Sessions. He obviously has a long career in politics. The Attorney General, was former senator. He's going back for his old seat here in Alabama. And he is winning currently by a very narrow margin. There's not, a large spread between him and, let's say, Tommy Tuberville and Bradley Byrne, who are kind of the other two frontrunners in this race. Originally, I was a John Merrill supporter, big fan of him. He's done a great job as Secretary of State, I believe. So I was sad to see him leave the race. But at this point, Jeff Sessions kind of has the most connections in Washington. He has those relationships. He's the most widely known in the state of Alabama. And I think he will probably lock up the nomination tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. How do you think that Jeff Sessions, but all the candidates, stack up and compare against Doug Jones?
I think, as you know, Alabama is a very, very, it's a deep red state. I think the Doug Jones victory was a bit of a fluke. Candidate Roy Moore was very, very flawed. I personally didn't support him. I wouldn't have voted for him. I wouldn't have voted for Senator Jones, but I would not have voted for Roy Moore just because I think there were so many moral issues there and so many questions about his background that I don't think it was a sign of a bigger issue. I think it was just really a referendum on bad quality candidates. And too many people, like myself, either stayed home or like, I can't vote for someone like this, but I also can't vote for a Democrat. Or they, those independents, those moderates, like I spoke about earlier, were like, okay, well, I have, gonna vote for Doug Jones because he promised to be a bipartisan senator. He promised to work across the aisle, which we have, he hasn't done. We haven't seen that bipartisanship that he promised. So I think as many people say, it's going to be one and done for Doug. And I don't think he'll win re-election, especially if you have a strong candidate like former Attorney General Jeff Sessions or Congressman Bradley Byrne going up against him.
So you've said that there's a lot of strong candidates that are running, and really right now, Sessions does have a slight majority over the others, but the gap isn't that large.
Exactly.
With the potential of no single candidate winning the 50% majority plus one vote that's required in the state of Alabama to win the nominee, and the possibility of a runoff come March 31st, who do you think those two candidates would be in the runoff?
It's probably going to be Jeff Sessions and Congressman Bradley Byrne. Tommy Tuberville's there, but he has had a bit of an interesting campaign. A bit controversial, not taking questions at town halls, being hard to reach, get a hold of. His campaign's been a little bit wishy-washy. And so I think it really is going to come down to Byrne and Sessions at the end of the day. Since Byrne has had a strong campaign, he is a sitting congressman, so he has that support here, that network here, as well as the relationships and the connections in Washington, and the support from fellow Republicans. So I think it'll come down to those two if we go into a runoff.
Alrighty. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Not a ton. I mean, this is going to be an exciting year. It's a very exciting time for the Republican Party as a whole. The president is hitting the ground hard, just wrapping up a rally in North Carolina. They're in Charlotte, seeing thousands and thousands of people come out. Many more rallies throughout the month of March, and the campaign's excited. One campaign official told me that they have a juggernaut of a campaign going. Like I said, tens of millions of dollars raised each and every month. Hundreds of millions of cash on hand. I mean, this campaign is fired up. There's a lot of positivity around it. We saw 150,000 ticket requests in New Jersey, a deep blue state, for the rally then back in January. So I think people are going to be shocked at just how many people and voters come out in support for the president this fall. But it's going to be a crazy year, a busy year, but I'm excited for it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sitting down with us.
Thanks for
this
having
interview.
me. Yeah, take care.
Welcome back, where we have breaking news regarding latest updates from state polls and also an updated delegate count. Eagle Eye projects Senator Bernie Sanders will take the state of Utah, which has 29 delegates up for grabs, but based on percentages, we'll find out the exact number he will take. Now for an updated delegate count. Senator Sanders has 103. Vice President Biden has 154. Buttigieg has 26, Warren has 9, Klobuchar has 7, and Bloomberg has 4. Now we'll send it out to the newsroom to hear more from AJ Rivera and Ryan Lavoie on what exactly the results mean for these states.
All right, so obviously we've seen a very back and forth tonight between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. Biden did a little weak in the first 4 pollings and the caucuses prior to Super Tuesday. Yet he's had a really strong turnaround today. What do you think the reason behind that is?
Well, obviously when you backtrack this race a little bit and you look at the first 4 states, Joe Biden comes into the 2020 process as the leader. He loses the states of New Hampshire, Nevada, and Iowa, and obviously Iowa was first. A lot of questions surrounding his campaign. He always said he had a wall in South Carolina with the African American vote. And getting the endorsement, first in South Carolina from Jim Clyburn, the House Whip, very popular in the state of South Carolina. That got him to the margin that he said, look, I'm still in this, I'm not dead. He wins that state by 28, 29 points. He then, with that margin, it kind of showed Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, look, the path is really tough for you. And so she dropped out, Pete Buttigieg dropped out, and not only did they drop out, they endorsed Joe Biden. They said, hey, look, supporters, support Joe Biden. And that kind of coalition in the middle of the party, in the moderate section of the party, that really has been what's propelled Joe Biden tonight. Getting those votes, I mean, you see it in places like Minnesota, you see it all over the place. States that Joe Biden might not even win tonight, that might go to Bernie Sanders or have gone to Bernie Sanders. It's not about who's winning these states all the time. It's about the margins, and it's about becoming viable. There were some states coming in the night Biden was not even supposed to be viable in, and he looks like he's going to be viable in every single state. So it's a big night for him, and that momentum really came from winning South Carolina, by the margin he did, and then by Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar's support.
So in 2016, Minnesota ended up going to Bernie Sanders. Yet now we're seeing Minnesota's going to Biden this time around. Do you think that is tied to Amy Klobuchar's endorsement?
Absolutely, because once again, when we look at the polls, and the endorsements kind of made the polls obsolete prior to anything taken prior to Sunday or Monday, because it was taken with Buttigieg and Klobuchar in, and while they weren't projected to win in states, they're getting 7% here, 10% there, 11% there, and most of that support is going to Biden. So when you project that to Minnesota, a state where Klobuchar was projected to, if not win, be neck and neck with Senator Sanders, Biden being a somewhat close third, I mean, you're talking about thousands and thousands of Klobuchar voters going over to Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. So I absolutely think that was the difference in Minnesota tonight, because as you said, it was a state that Bernie Sanders won against Hillary Clinton in 2016, and it's a state that really did have their support behind Amy Klobuchar. We've seen that waver for Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts tonight. That's not always a foregone conclusion that you win your own state. You mentioned off air to me earlier tonight, 2016, Marco Rubio not winning the state of Florida and the Republican side. It's not always a foregone conclusion. But Amy Klobuchar did have that support. She spoke to her voters in Minnesota yesterday campaigning for Joe Biden, and ultimately I do think that was the difference tonight in Minnesota.
So kind of a candidate who, we'll just say it, Mike Bloomberg. He has spent a lot of money on his campaigning, and he made what some would consider a risky decision, deciding to sit out the first four polls, the first four primaries and caucuses, and not really starting his name on the ballot until Super Tuesday. And as we can see, he's won very few delegates so far, so much so that we've learned that tomorrow he's going to be readdressing his campaign. What do you think that we can expect from this readdressment?
Usually when you have to reassess a campaign, you have to come to terms with the fact that it's not looking good. And Michael Bloomberg has spent $234 million in these Super Tuesday states. Mm-hmm. And look, he's got a lot of money. He has it. He could spend it all over again as well. But $234 million is an eye raiser, and it comes to terms. You come to terms with the fact that you should have been in it from the long haul. He was really banking on Joe Biden to fall apart. He was banking on what had happened the first three states was perfect for him. Joe Biden going from the front runner to finishing second, third, fourth in some of these states, looking like he wasn't even going to be viable in all these states. That was the dream scenario for Bloomberg, and it was happening until South Carolina. And the thought was that Biden being moderate, Bloomberg, in fact, some question whether he even is a true Democrat, he's so moderate, really drawing votes off of one another. And that was originally a concern for Biden entering Tuesday. But what happened in South Carolina, as great as it was for Biden, it was as poor as it could be for Bloomberg. It really took away from his support. It took away from his argument that he was the best moderate candidate. And it really made all that money obsolete, because that combined with his debate performances were pretty poor on all accounts. People got to know him a little bit, and they didn't really like it. And they really coalesced their support behind Joe Biden, if you're the moderate part of the Democratic Party. And so really for Michael Bloomberg tomorrow, I would expect him, honestly, to be, if I'm forthcoming with you, I think he'll drop out tomorrow, because he'll get some delegates here and there. He'll be viable in California. He'll be viable, I think, in Texas. He'll be viable some other places. He'll get delegates. But he's going to be hundreds of delegates behind Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. There's a clear two-man race now between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And so Michael Bloomberg is going to have to ask himself, what's the realistic chances here? Elizabeth Warren's going to have that conversation tomorrow as well.
All righty. Well, we thank you for sitting down with us. And now we send it back to Delaney Barrow in the news studio.
Welcome back, where we have more updates on state polls. Vice President Joe Biden, Eagle Eye projects, will win Massachusetts, which has 91 delegates up for grabs. Bernie Sanders came in second, with Elizabeth Warren coming in third in her own state. Based on the percentages, we'll figure out the exact votes each person gets. Back after the break, we'll have more updates for you. Welcome back, where we have footage of protesters in California at Vice President Biden's rally protesting all the events. There's a lot of commotion out there. Not really sure what's going on. Looks like a lot of unhappy protesters. Several people have been escorted out. Just a very dramatic change of events. But next Sam is gonna bring it back with more updates on the state of Alabama.
That's right, Delaney. We have a new update on Amendment 1 for Alabama. But we're going to show a quick video just about what Amendment 1 is all about.
There's a new amendment up for voting in this year's primary election. Titled Amendment 1, this new amendment would rename the State Board of Education to the Alabama Commission on Elementary and Secondary Education. Currently, the state board is elected and the superintendent is appointed by the board. Alabama is one of 11 states that elects their school boards and one of 6 where the board then appoints the superintendent. Other states include Michigan and Utah. The new amendment would change the board from being elected by voters to being appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. The title of the State Superintendent of Education would also be changed to the Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Education. The new amendment would align Alabama with 12 other states, including Kentucky, Florida, and Arkansas. If this amendment passes, it would be the 947th amendment to the Alabama Constitution, which is already the longest constitution in the nation. The amendment is one of the big talking points of Governor Kay Ivey's State of the State address. She states, "We've become too complacent on being at or near the bottom of national education rankings." Citing the nation's report card, Alabama is 49th in terms of reading and 52nd in terms of math. Governor Ivey claims too many of our high school graduates simply aren't ready for college or a career, and has high hopes that the new amendment will improve education in Alabama. As votes come in, Eagle Eye will keep you informed on whether this amendment passes or not.
Welcome back, where we have breaking news that Amendment 1 has failed in the state of Alabama. This proposed amendment the failed amendment means that the board will still be elected by Alabama voters, but the proposed amendment suggested that the board would be appointed, and it also suggested a name change for the Alabama Board of Education. Coming up, we'll have more updates on the primaries. You're watching Eagle Eye.
Welcome back to Eye on the Primary. With 3 states remaining with the primaries, with Maine, Texas, and California. We're going to send it out to AJ Rivera and his other correspondent in the newsroom for more information.
All right, so we're starting to get to near the end of the night. We have about 3 states left that we're not quite ready to call. Maine and Texas both have their polls have already closed, but I think we can agree that the race is just way too close to call at this stage. And then obviously California has about 20 minutes left until their polls are closing. So let's kind of start off with Maine. Right now in Maine, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are within less than 1% of the vote within one another. Why do you think that is?
Well, once again, we've been talking about momentum all night, and it is quite surprising in Maine. It's a state very near Vermont, obviously. It's a part of the country Bernie Sanders has historically done very well in. Not a lot of polls are done out of Maine, but they still showed at least Sanders with some sort of lead, even if it was dwindling in recent days. So it's been very surprising. It's just a microcosm of everything that's happened with Joe Biden and with the dynamic of this race. You asked me a week ago, I think Bernie Sanders was well on his way to being the nominee. You ask me right now, Joe Biden's having a really good night. He's really changing the dynamic of this race. And Maine, look, not a lot of delegates, but it's still it's a math equation, and it's every single delegate counts. And even if Bernie Sanders wins the state, something I talked about a little bit earlier, it's not that Biden has to win all these states; it's that he has to change the margins and change the math, and he's done just that. So we've seen it times tonight. It's been a 12 vote lead, 100 vote lead, 200 vote lead. It's an incredibly close race in Maine. That's something Bernie Sanders did not expect.
Okay, now moving it a little further down south to Texas. So right now the difference, it is a bit bigger. There's about a 5% difference, but it's still a very close race with a very almost minimal amount that's still reporting. Do you think that the reasons for that are similar?
I think so. Now, I wouldn't say Joe Biden has gotten as big of a bump here as he's gotten other places. I talked about Virginia. Virginia was a pick-em a week ago, a slight Biden lead entering tonight. He won the state by 30-plus points. Really great job in Virginia. In Texas, recent days polling, Sanders plus 10, plus 9, somewhere in there. We see a 5-point margin, too close to call. Maybe Biden can eat into it. I'm still leaning towards I think Sanders wins this. But once again, it's about being viable. It's about counting into the delegate count and chirping away at some of those big delegate totals, because there's over 200 delegates at stake in Texas. If Bernie Sanders had been at 30 and Joe Biden had been at 15, that could be 150, 160 delegates to Sanders, and that could be only 30 or 40 for Biden and maybe someone else. Now we're looking at a pretty similar delegate haul, no matter who wins the state, and that's going to be a disappointment for Sanders. There's been a lot of campaigning in Texas as well, because yesterday that's where Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar met up with the Biden campaign. Beto O'Rourke, someone that dropped out before the first primary, he gave his support for Joe Biden. So those endorsements have not been as big in Texas, a much bigger state, a very diverse state, a high Latino vote, something that Bernie Sanders has done incredibly well. And we've talked about Joe Biden with the African-American vote, but Latinos have been really good for Bernie Sanders. So that's what's holding him up in Texas. And Joe Biden has not been able to change that part of the equation. But still, eating into the delegate number, it's a good night for Biden, even in Texas.
So now moving on to our third and final state of the night, who still, they have not closed their polls yet, but that is coming up in just a few minutes. The big one, California. They're offering over 400 delegates for the Democrats that are running. Who do you think Biden is going to be able to keep his momentum up, or do you think this is going to be one of those states that goes to Bernie?
So as we've moved west, it's been more positive for Bernie Sanders. Obviously, he's going to carry Colorado. He's going to carry Utah, I believe we project as well. So it's out in it's been getting better for him. With California, the thing that will hurt Biden is so many early votes. And to some degree in Texas, that was in play. Over 1 million voted early. But the mail-in ballots, the early voting in California, I believe exceeded 3 million. That's, even in a state as large as California, that's a huge chunk of the electorate. That's a huge chunk of how many people voted tonight. So I think what the difference will be, once again, a week ago, Biden's probably not viable in California. He's probably the 10 to 12% range. Tonight, because of the momentum, he will become viable. I think he'll get 16, 17, 18%. He's not going to win California. California might be able to be called somewhat early, but it's getting 40, 50 delegates rather than zero. It's cutting Sanders down from, instead of 300 delegates, maybe 200, 220. So coming in the night, I would have told you Sanders gets 300 or so delegates out of California. Biden probably doesn't get any. I would have told you Sanders gets at least 100, 120 out of Texas. Biden maybe gets 20 or 30. I think that's gone from, what is that, a 200, 300 electoral vote or 200, 300 vote margin to maybe as small as Sanders plus 100 or so in those two states. That's a huge change, and that's going to really change the math. And it ultimately we'll have to see. Really won't know till tomorrow. But there's a chance all of a sudden that Joe Biden comes out of the night as the electoral vote leader. Not a given. I still think Sanders should be given a slight edge there. But if you would have told someone that a week ago, the way the Biden campaign was trending, wouldn't have believed you.
So at the end of tonight, the Democrats will have given about a third of their delegates have already been given away in polls. But that still leaves about 60% of the delegates that still have to be polls that still have to be voted on in the coming months. Do you think that this is going to come into a race of Bernie Sanders versus Joe Biden?
I absolutely do. We talked earlier in the night about Michael Bloomberg reassessing his campaign tomorrow. I think Elizabeth Warren's got to do the same. We haven't mentioned her tonight. I will mention her for this, just to say Tulsi Gabbard is still in the race.
Yeah.
She won a couple electoral votes in the American Samoa caucuses tonight, but she's long been considered not viable for the nomination. She should be out. And like I said, Elizabeth Warren and Michael Bloomberg very likely to make decisions along those lines very soon. The thing is, between Biden and Sanders, is that you have two staunchly different viewpoints. And once Elizabeth Warren backs out of the race, if she does, that vote should go back towards Bernie Sanders' camp. that'll be a boost that he will sorely need at the time. So it's tough to predict some of these states and what exactly will happen. I do think it's a two-man race, though. I do think when we look at March 10th, Joe Biden has another southern state in Mississippi that he should do very well in. I believe Michigan's coming up. That'll be an important state that Sanders has been currently leading. You look at March 17th in 2 weeks, and that's Florida, and that's a state that does not figure to do well for Bernie Sanders. So you start looking ahead, you start to look at other states. As important tonight is, there's more to come, as you just mentioned. So I do think it's a two-person race ultimately. If Bloomberg stays in, okay, he might be still taking some votes away from Biden. If Warren stays in, okay, she's taking votes away from Sanders. But ultimately, if those two drop out, they probably should drop out. It's a two-person race, and really you just start to separate in the party. Is the party more of a slightly liberal party, or is it a very liberal party? We'll start to find that out.
All righty. Well, now we're going to be throwing it right back to Delaney Barrow.
Welcome back. Eagle Eye is now projecting a runoff election for the Republican Senate primary between former Auburn coach Tommy Tuberville and former Attorney General Jeff Sessions after no one earned over 50% of the vote. The runoff election will be on March 31st, with the winner going on to face Democratic Senator Doug Jones in November's election. Stay tuned after the break as we await the results of 3 states still yet to be released, including California, Texas, and Maine. You're watching Eye on the Primary.
We are not prepared to call Maine, Texas, and California, so we're going to wrap it up here on Eye on the Primaries. Be sure to check out our website, eagleeyeauburn.com, for all the latest up-to-date information from Super Tuesday. I'm Sam Humphrey.
And I'm Delaney Barrow. Thanks for joining us in War Eagle.